We booked Italy, just the five of us. You understand, right? That's what my father said at breakfast, like it was nothing, like I wasn't sitting right there with them. No one looked at me. No one asked if I wanted to go. And I just nodded, like I always did, like it didn't bother me. But that night, my phone lit up with a bank alert. $9,800 charged for their trip on my card. And that's when something clicked. I wasn't left out by accident. I was left out on purpose. But my money wasn't. They thought I'd let it go. They thought I'd fix it, like I always did. What they didn't realize was this time was different. Because by the next morning, everything they planned was already starting to fall apart. And if you want to understand why I didn't say a word back then, you have to go back a few years. A few years ago, everything looked normal on the surface. We lived in the same house, ate at the same table. But the way things worked behind that was different. I was the one who stayed up late finishing things no one noticed. I handled bills that weren't technically mine. I covered gaps no one talked about. It was always temporary, always just for now, always followed by a promise that never quite made it back to me. And for a long time, I told myself that was normal. That's what you do for family, right? You step in. You help. You don't keep score. Part of me knew something was off. I'd feel it in small moments, like when my father would say, "Just put it on yours for now," like it was already decided. Or when my mom would thank me in that soft voice that sounded more like relief than appreciation. I noticed it. I just didn't want to name it, because naming it would mean I'd have to do something about it. And I wasn't ready for that. So I let it go. Again and again. It never came all at once. It was small things at first. A hotel deposit here. A repair bill there. Then it turned into bigger things. Medical expenses, travel costs, emergency funds that stopped feeling like emergencies. And each time, I told myself the same thing. It's just this once. It's not a big deal. They'll handle it later. But later has a way of disappearing when people get comfortable. After a while, it stopped feeling like I was helping. It started feeling like I was expected. Like there was already a version of me in their heads that existed to fill in whatever was missing. And the hardest part wasn't the money. It was how easy it was for them to assume I'd say yes. There's a moment you don't notice at first. When helping turns into obligation. When appreciation turns into silence. When you stop being asked and start being used. I felt that shift. I just didn't stop it. Because stopping it would have meant disrupting everything. It would have meant being the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who suddenly changed, and I wasn't ready to be seen that way. So I kept going. I paid what needed to be paid. I filled in the gaps. I stayed quiet when something didn't sit right. I convinced myself it was easier that way. But the truth is, silence doesn't keep the peace. It just delays the cost. And by the time Italy happened, the cost had already been building for years. They didn't wake up one day and decide to use my card. They got there slowly. One small step at a time. One assumption at a time. One, "she'll handle it," at a time. And I let them. That's the part I had to face. Not just what they did, but how long I made it possible. Because when people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a solution, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens when you keep showing up the same way, even when something feels wrong. And I did. I showed up. I covered things. I stayed quiet. Until that night, sitting in my car, staring at that charge, I realized something I couldn't unsee. They didn't forget to include me. They just remembered what I was good for. And once you see that clearly, you can't go back to pretending it's something else. The question wasn't whether this was wrong anymore. The question was what I was going to do about it. It usually started with something small, a text. "Hey, can you cover this real quick?" Or a casual comment across the table. "Just put it on yours for now. I'll get it later." And the way it was said, It never sounded like a question, more like a decision that had already been made. At first, I didn't think much of it. I had a stable job. I was doing well. Helping out didn't feel like a burden. It felt like the right thing to do. That's what I told myself anyway. So I'd say yes. Swipe the card. Send the transfer. Cover the gap. And every time there was always a reason. Something urgent. Something temporary. Something that made it feel justified. A repair that couldn't wait. A bill that slipped through. A situation that just happened. And I believed it. Or maybe I just wanted to. Because it's easier to step in than to question people you trust. It's easier to fix the problem than to ask why it keeps happening. That was the pattern. I just didn't call it that yet. It didn't escalate overnight. It grew slowly, almost quietly. Small amounts turned into bigger ones. Occasional favors turned into expectations. And somewhere along the way, the language changed. It went from, "Can you help?" to, "You'll handle it, right?" That shift is subtle. You don't catch it the first time. Or the second. You only notice it when it's already normal. I remember one night standing in the kitchen, looking at a receipt I didn't even remember agreeing to. My father was talking about it like it had already been settled. "Good thing you were there," he said. "Otherwise we would have been stuck." I nodded, like I always did. But something about that moment stayed with me. Not what he said, but how easily he said it. Like my role had already been defined, like I was part of the solution before I even knew there was a problem. Part of me wanted to push back, ask questions, set a boundary, but another part of me didn't want to make it a thing, because once you question it, you risk changing the dynamic. And once the dynamic changes, people start seeing you differently. I wasn't ready for that, so I let it go. Again, and again, and again. Until letting it go stopped feeling like a choice. It became a habit. That's the part people don't talk about. It's not the big moment that traps you. It's the repetition, the consistency, the way something small becomes routine without ever being acknowledged. I started noticing other things too, like how no one really kept track of what I covered. There was no conversation about paying me back unless I brought it up. And even then, it was always vague. "Yeah, we'll figure it out. Next month. Don't worry about it right now." And I didn't. Not out loud. But internally, something kept a quiet record. Not numbers, not spreadsheets. Just moments. Patterns. The feeling that something wasn't balanced anymore. I'd catch myself hesitating before saying yes. Just for a second. A pause no one else noticed. That hesitation told me more than anything else. It meant I knew. I just didn't act on it. Because acting on it would mean accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. That maybe this wasn't about helping anymore. That maybe I wasn't just the reliable one. I was the fallback. The one you don't ask. Because you already know the answer. And once that role locks in, it's hard to step out of it without breaking something. I think part of me believed that if I kept showing up the same way, eventually they'd notice. That they'd appreciate it, or at least recognize the weight of it. But that's not how it works. People don't always notice consistency. They adapt to it. And when they adapt to it, it stops being something you do and starts being something they expect. That realization didn't hit all at once. It showed up in small ways. A comment that went a little too far. A joke that didn't feel like a joke. A moment where I realized no one was checking in with me, only checking what I could cover. And still, I stayed quiet. Because speaking up would have meant disrupting everything. And silence felt easier. At least in the moment. But silence doesn't remove the pressure. It just moves it inward. And over time, that pressure builds. Not enough to explode. Just enough to change how you see things. I started paying attention differently, not to what they said, but to what they assumed. And that's where everything shifted. Because assumptions don't come from nowhere. They come from patterns. Patterns I had helped create. That's the uncomfortable truth. They didn't suddenly start relying on me. They learned they could, and I showed them that every single time I said yes. That's what made Italy different, not because it was bigger, but because it was the first time I couldn't pretend it was accidental. And once you stop believing it's accidental, you start seeing everything that led up to it. And that's when you realize this wasn't one moment, it was a system. And systems don't break because of one moment. They break when someone finally stops playing their part. The Italy trip was the first time I saw the whole thing clearly. It started like any other conversation. My father brought it up at breakfast, casual, almost proud, talking about flights, cities, timing like it had already been decided. Rome first, then Florence, then Venice. My mother was nodding along. My sister was scrolling through her phone, already looking at outfits. No one asked if I was going. That stood out, but not enough to say anything, because part of me assumed it would come up later. That maybe they were still figuring things out. That maybe I'd be included once details were finalized. I told myself that because it was easier than asking. Then my father said it. Just the five of us. Not aggressive, not even cold. Just final. I remember the way my hand tightened around my mug. Not enough for anyone to notice, just enough for me to feel it. There's a kind of silence that doesn't happen in the room. It happens inside you. That was it. I could have said something. That's the part that stayed with me later. I could have asked why. I could have pushed back. I could have made it uncomfortable for them. But I didn't. Because in that moment I was still trying to protect something that had already shifted. So I nodded, like I always did. And they moved on like nothing happened. That's what made it worse. Not the exclusion, not even the decision. It was how normal it felt to them. Like I had already been removed from the equation and nobody thought that needed explaining. That night, I got home later than usual. Work had been busy, and I was tired enough that I didn't want to think about it. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and for a few minutes, I almost convinced myself it didn't matter. Then my phone buzzed. A bank alert. At first, I didn't even react. It could have been anything. A subscription, a random charge, something routine. But when I opened it, I just stopped. $9,800. Charged through a travel agency. For flights, hotels, tours. 5 passengers. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I didn't want to accept what it meant. There's a moment when something obvious still feels unreal. That was it. Part of me tried to explain it away. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe they used my card by mistake. Maybe they were going to tell me later. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't come with full itineraries and confirmed bookings. Mistakes don't happen this cleanly. I opened the receipt, and there it was. Every detail laid out. Names, dates, reservations. Everything organized. Everything finalized. Everything. Except me. That's when it shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a quiet realization that settled in and didn't move. I wasn't left out. I was replaced. Replaced by something easier. Something predictable. My card. That's the part that stayed with me. Not the money. Not even the trip. The fact that somewhere along the way, it made more sense to include what I could provide than who I was. And once that becomes the logic, everything else follows. Because if you're not part of the experience but you're still funding it, then your role was never what you thought it was. And that realization changes how you look at everything that comes next. Because now it's not about what they did. It's about what you're willing to keep allowing. I sat on the edge of my bed with the receipt still open, reading the same lines like they might change if I slowed down enough. Names, dates, transfers, everything laid out clean and confirmed. It looked organized. It looked intentional. And that's what made it harder to ignore. My first instinct was still to explain it away. Not for them. For me. I told myself maybe they meant to talk to me first. Maybe this was temporary. Maybe they assumed I'd be okay with it because I always had been. That word kept coming back. Assumed. I closed the app, then opened it again. Same number. Same charge. Same reality staring back at me. There's a point where logic runs out, and all you're left with is pattern recognition. And I couldn't unsee the pattern anymore. This wasn't the first time they had relied on me. It wasn't even the second or third. The difference was, this time, it was too clear to soften. Too deliberate to misinterpret. I leaned back against the wall and let that sink in. Part of me still wanted to go downstairs, show them the charge, ask for an explanation. That's what I would have done before. Try to resolve it. Give them a chance to explain it in a way that didn't feel as bad. But another part of me stopped that instinct. Because I already knew what they would say. It's not a big deal. We were going to tell you. You always help with this stuff. Different words, same meaning. And for the first time, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. They weren't misunderstanding me. They understood me perfectly. They understood that I wouldn't say no. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. Quiet, steady clarity that didn't rush or spike. It just settled in place and stayed there. I wasn't being included because they valued me. I was being included when they needed something handled. That's a hard distinction to sit with, because it forces you to reframe everything that came before. Every thank you, every we'll pay you back. Every moment that felt like appreciation starts to look different. Not fake, just convenient. I thought back to all the times I said yes without thinking. All the moments I filled in gaps no one else even noticed. It wasn't just that I helped. It was that I made it easy to keep asking. That's the part that doesn't feel good to admit, because it means I played a role in building something I didn't want to face. People don't usually push as far as they can. They push as far as you've shown them is okay. And I had shown them a lot. I stood up, walked to the sink, and let the water run longer than necessary. Not because I needed it, but because I needed a second to separate what I felt from what I knew. What I felt was complicated. Still loyal, still protective, still tied to the idea of family. What I knew was simpler. This wasn't an accident. And once you see something clearly, you don't get to go back to how it felt before. That's the moment things shift. Not when something happens, but when you finally understand what it means. I dried my hands and looked at my phone again, not to check the charge, but to decide what came next. Because now it wasn't about them. It was about me. And more specifically, what I was willing to keep allowing. That question stayed with me longer than anything else. Because once you stop asking, why did they do this? And start asking, why did I accept it? The answers get a lot more uncomfortable and a lot more useful. I picked up my phone again, this time not to read, but to act. My thumb hovered over the screen longer than it should have. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what it would mean once I did it. There's a difference between realizing something and responding to it. One is internal. The other changes everything. I opened my banking app. The charge was still there, pending, but real enough to count. I tapped into the transaction details, reading through the itinerary again, slower this time. Flights, hotels, transfers, tours. It wasn't just a trip. It was a full plan built on something that wasn't theirs to use. For a second, I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to go downstairs and give them a chance to explain, to hear them say it wasn't what it looked like, that they had a reason, that this would somehow make sense if I just listened long enough. But I knew better. Because when something is built on assumption, explanation usually comes after the fact. And it's rarely honest. It's just convenient. So I didn't go downstairs. I stayed exactly where I was and hit the first button. Freeze card. The screen refreshed. The status changed. Just like that, access was gone. It felt smaller than I expected. Quieter. No dramatic moment. No instant shift in the room. Just a simple change on a screen that no one else could see yet. And still, it mattered. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to what they did. I was controlling what happened next. I didn't stop there. I went through every account tied to my name: streaming services, shared subscriptions, travel profiles, anything they had access to. One by one, I changed passwords, removed permissions, added security layers that should have been there all along. It wasn't about punishment. It was about separation. There's a difference people don't always understand. When you pull back access, it feels like rejection to the person losing it. But from the inside, it feels like clarity. I wasn't taking something from them. I was taking myself out of something that was never balanced. As I moved through each account, I started noticing patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. Bookings made under my email. Rewards points accumulated under my name. Transactions I didn't question at the time, but now made more sense than I wanted them to. That's the thing about stepping back. You don't just see what's in front of you. You see everything that led there. I downloaded receipts, emails, confirmations, not out of anger, but out of awareness. If this turned into a conversation, I wasn't going to rely on memory. I was going to rely on facts, because facts don't shift when emotions do. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. The house was quiet. Everyone else had gone to bed, still thinking everything was in place. That part almost got to me. Knowing they were sleeping peacefully, expecting a trip that no longer had a foundation, expecting everything to work the way it always had. And for a second, I felt it again. That pull to fix it, to smooth it over before it became a problem, to step in and keep things from breaking. That instinct doesn't disappear overnight. But this time, I didn't follow it. Because fixing something that was built wrong doesn't make it right. It just keeps it going. So I put my phone down and sat there in the quiet, letting that decision settle. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to change. I was changing my role in the situation. And the moment that shifts, everything connected to it starts to move. They just didn't know it yet. The first decline came in before breakfast. My phone buzzed while I was pouring coffee, and I already knew what it was before I checked. There's a different kind of notification when something doesn't go through. It feels sharper, more immediate. I looked down. Transaction declined. No message from them yet, no call, just silence. I set my phone face down and walked to the table like nothing had changed. My father was already sitting there, scrolling through his phone with that same calm expression he always had when things were handled. My mother was pouring coffee. My sister was talking about outfits again, like the trip was already real. For a second, I wondered if maybe it hadn't hit them yet. Then my father frowned. Just slightly. Almost nothing. He tapped his screen once, then again, like the app would correct itself if he gave it a second. My mother noticed before anyone else. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. That pause told me more than anything he could have said. "The payment didn't go through," he finally said. "Probably just a security hold." Chris groaned. "Dad, you said everything was handled." "It is handled," my father snapped, but his voice didn't carry the same certainty it had yesterday. I took a slow sip of coffee. No one looked at me yet. They were still circling it, still trying to keep it from becoming real. Then my phone buzzed again. Another decline. This time, I saw my father's jaw tighten. My mother set her cup down more carefully than necessary. My sister stopped talking mid-sentence. "What card did you use?" my mother asked. That question hung in the air, because they all knew the answer. They just didn't want to say it out loud. My father cleared his throat. The family card. I almost smiled. There is no such thing as a family card. There's just a person who pays, and a story people tell to make it sound shared. I set my cup down and looked at him. There is no family card. The room shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Everyone turned toward me at once. That's the moment I remember most. Not what they said, but how quickly attention moved when the truth got named. Megan, not now, my father said. Actually, I replied, keeping my voice even. Now seems like the right time. My sister leaned back in her chair. Wait, was that your card? I looked at her. You didn't know? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Chris rubbed his forehead. Come on, Megan. Don't turn this into a whole thing. I held his gaze. A whole thing is planning a trip without someone and still using their card to pay for it. Silence. Real silence this time. Not avoidance, not deflection. Just the weight of something no one wanted to carry. My father pushed his chair back slightly. No one used anything maliciously. You've helped with family travel before. When I was going, I said. Or when I agreed. We were going to reimburse you, he added quickly. When? I asked. Before or after the trip? His face flushed, just enough to show it landed. My mother stepped in, softer now. Megan, your father has been under stress. This trip means a lot to everyone. Can we not make this bigger than it is? That's when it clicked. They weren't upset about what happened. They were upset that it stopped working. I leaned back slightly. I didn't make it bigger. The decline charges did. My sister's voice cut in. You froze it, didn't you? I nodded once. Yes. Chris stood up. Are you serious? We leave tomorrow. Not on my card, I said. That line sat in the air longer than anything else. Because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactive. It was final. My father slammed his hand down on the table. You will unfreeze that card right now. That tone used to work. It used to make me second-guess myself. Backtrack. Apologize even when I didn't need to. But this time, it didn't land the same. No, I said. One word. No explanation. No defense. Just, no. He stared at me like I had just said something foreign. Excuse me? I froze the card. I removed access. Any charge from this point on will fail. My mother's expression shifted from concern to something sharper. How could you do this to us? Not, what did we do? Not, how did this happen? Just, how could you stop it? That's when you understand where you stand. I picked up my bag and stood. I'm not doing anything to you, I said. I'm just not covering it anymore. My father reached for his phone. I'm calling the bank. Go ahead, I said. They already know. That stopped him. For the first time, I saw it register. I had moved before they did. And once that happens, the dynamic changes. Not loudly, but permanently. I walked toward the door and my mother's voice followed me. You're walking away from your family? I paused, just for a second. Not because I was unsure, because I knew what the answer meant. I'm walking away from the bill. And that difference is what they couldn't accept. Because the moment you separate yourself from what people expect you to provide, you force them to face what they built without you. I didn't go back to my room. I went to my laptop. It was still open from the night before, the folder sitting there like it had been waiting. I clicked into it. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Receipts, confirmations, old emails, all lined up in a way that made more sense now than they ever did before. I didn't plan to use it at first. That's the truth. Part of me thought the conversation at breakfast would be enough. That saying it out loud would shift something. That once they realized how it looked, they'd correct it. But they didn't. So I opened the first file. Not aggressively. Not like I was trying to prove a point. More like I was finally acknowledging something that had been there the whole time. 2 years ago, I said, turning the screen toward them. I covered the roof repair. 4,500. No one spoke. I was told half would be paid back. It wasn't. I clicked to the next one. Last year, Sarah's moving expenses, 2,900. My sister shifted in her seat. That's not the same thing, she said, but her voice didn't carry much weight. I didn't respond to that. 6 months ago, I continued, Chris's truck repair, covered in full. Chris looked down at the table. And 3 months ago, Mom's specialist appointment and medication. My mother's hands tightened around her cup. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't even looking at them most of the time. I was just reading. That's what made it land. Because this wasn't an argument, it was a record. There's a difference between defending yourself and showing what's already there. One invites debate, the other removes it. I clicked through each entry, not rushing, not dragging it out. Just enough to let it register. Just enough for the pattern to become visible. No one interrupted again. They couldn't, because every time someone thought about pushing back, there was another line waiting behind it. Another date. Another amount. Another moment they had already moved past. That's the thing about documentation. It doesn't care how you feel about it. It just exists. After a while, I stopped clicking. Not because I ran out, because I didn't need to keep going. The room already felt different. Heavier. More honest. My father leaned back slightly, arms crossed. You kept track of all this? He asked. I looked at him. No, I just stopped forgetting. That line stayed in the air longer than anything else, because it wasn't about numbers. It was about awareness. For years, I had let things blur together, let moments pass without holding on to them. Not because I couldn't remember, but because remembering would have forced me to see the pattern sooner. And I wasn't ready for that. Now, I was. My mother's voice came in softer this time. We never meant for it to feel like this. I nodded slightly. I believe that. And I did. That's the complicated part. Intent and impact don't always match. You can mean well, and still build something that benefits you at someone else's expense. That realization doesn't make anyone a villain. It just removes the excuse. Sarah spoke again, quieter now. I didn't know it was that much. I looked at her. You didn't need to know the number. You just needed to notice the pattern. She didn't answer. Because deep down, she probably had. We all do, at some level. We just choose when to admit it. I closed the laptop halfway. Not to end the conversation, but to change it. Look, I said, this isn't about one trip. No one argued with that, because now they could see it wasn't. It's about what this has been for a while. I let that sit for a second, because once you name something accurately, you don't need to over-explain it. My father exhaled slowly like he was recalibrating. So what now? He asked. That question used to intimidate me. It used to feel like pressure. Now it just felt clear. Now, I said, you handle your own expenses. Simple, direct, unavoidable. Because once the numbers are out in the open, the next step isn't negotiation. It's consequence. The first cancellation email came in before noon. I was at my desk when it showed up, subject line short and polite, like it wasn't undoing anything important. Payment verification required. I opened it, already knowing where it was going. Without a valid payment method, the Rome Hotel couldn't hold the reservation. I read it once, then closed it. Not because I didn't care, because I understood. This is what happens when something built on assumption meets reality. My phone started buzzing again a few minutes later. My father. I let it ring. Then a message. Call me. Now. I didn't. Another buzz. My mother this time. There's an issue with the booking. An issue. That's how it starts. Not as a problem. not as a consequence, just an issue that needs to be fixed like it always has been. For a second, I felt that familiar pull, the instinct to step in, smooth it over, make the call, find the solution before it got worse. That instinct doesn't disappear just because you see the pattern. It lingers. But this time, I let it pass. Because fixing it would mean pretending I didn't understand what it really was. And I did. By early afternoon, the second email came through. Florence reservation, released. No deposit, no hold, no guarantee. That one hit differently. Not harder, just clearer. Because now it wasn't a single glitch. It was a chain reaction. I could picture them in the house, phones out, refreshing apps, calling numbers, trying to reconnect something that had already been disconnected, trying to recreate stability without the piece that had been holding it together. That's the part people don't expect. When something relies on one point, removing it doesn't just weaken the system. It reveals how much of it was never independent. Another message from Chris. Megan, this is getting serious. We need to fix this. We, that word again. I stared at it longer than I should have. Because we only shows up when something needs to be handled. It disappears when everything is working. I typed back slowly. You need to handle your bookings. Not cold, not aggressive, just accurate. He didn't respond right away. Instead, Sarah called. I answered that one. Her voice was tight. Do you know what's happening? Yes. Well, can you just unfreeze it? Just until we sort it out? There it was. Not acknowledgement, not apology, just a request to restore the system. I'm not doing that, I said. A pause. You're really going to let this fall apart? I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window. I'm not letting anything fall apart, I said. I'm just not holding it together anymore. Silence. Not angry this time. Just unfamiliar. Because people don't always know how to respond when you stop playing the role they expect. She hung up without another word. By late afternoon, the third notification came through. Venice apartment. Cancelled. No alternative secured. At that point, it wasn't about inconvenience anymore. It was about exposure. Because now other people were starting to notice. Katie. Her name was on the booking too. And when plans change suddenly, questions follow. That's when the consequences move beyond the original circle. That's when it stops being a private issue. My father called again. This time, I answered. His voice was sharper than before. You've ruined this. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't have something to say, because I wanted to be sure it was the right thing. No, I said finally. I stopped paying for it. He exhaled hard. Your mother is upset. I closed my eyes for a second. That used to be enough. That sentence alone used to shift everything, make me reconsider, make me step back. But now it felt different. I was upset too, I said, when I realized what you did. Another pause. This one heavier. Because there wasn't an easy way around that. By the end of the day, the group chat went quiet. No more updates, no more planning messages. Just a gap where something used to be. That's how collapse actually looks. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just pieces falling out of place until there's nothing left to hold. And when that happens, people don't always face the structure. They look for someone to blame. But this time, there wasn't a clean target. Because deep down, they knew. This didn't start when I said no. It started when yes became expected. And the moment that expectation breaks, everything that depends on it has to answer for itself. And once you see it clearly, you can't stay in the same place pretending nothing changed. I went back to the house that night, not to argue, not to fix anything, just to get my things. My keys felt heavier than usual in my hand, like they still belonged to something I had already stepped out of. The living room lights were on. My parents were sitting there, quieter than I'd ever seen them. No TV, no background noise. Just that kind of silence people sit in when something didn't go the way they expected. My mother looked up first. "You're really going to do this?" she asked. I paused for a second, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I knew what she meant by this. Not the card, not the trip, the shift. "I already did," I said. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're walking away over one situation." That line almost got me. Almost. Because part of me still wanted to believe it was just one situation, that it could be isolated, contained, fixed with one conversation. But I knew better now. "I'm not walking away because of Italy," I said. "I'm walking away because it showed me everything." He didn't respond right away. That was new. Usually he had something ready, a reason, a way to redirect. Now he just sat there. My mother's voice softened. "We've done a lot for you." That one landed differently, not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. "I know," I said, "and I'm not taking that away." That's the part people misunderstand. Setting a boundary doesn't erase the past, it just defines the present. "But what you've done for me," I continued, "doesn't mean I owe you access to everything I have." Silence again. Not tense this time. Just settled. Like something had finally been said without being softened. I walked down the hallway to my room. The same room I'd been in for years. The same walls. The same furniture. The same space that used to feel like mine. It didn't feel the same anymore. I opened the closet and started packing, not quickly, not dramatically. Just one thing at a time. Clothes, documents, the things that mattered. There's a strange clarity in moments like that. You stop overthinking. You stop negotiating with yourself. You just move. Halfway through, I stopped and looked around. Not for memories, for understanding. Because leaving isn't always about distance. Sometimes it's about recognizing that you've already outgrown the role you were placed in. My father stood in the doorway. "If you leave like this," he said, "don't expect things to be the same." I nodded. "I'm not expecting them to be." That's the point. I closed my bag, picked it up, and walked past him. No one stopped me. Not physically. And that told me everything I needed to know. Because people who want you to stay don't just warn you about consequences. They ask you why you're leaving. I stepped outside, the air colder than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not relief, not yet. Just separation. Clean, unavoidable, real. And once you create that kind of distance, you start to see what was holding you there in the first place. The first morning in my new place was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. No voices down the hall, no background conversations, no one asking for anything before I even had coffee, just space. I stood in the kitchen, holding a mug I didn't have to share, realizing how much of my routine had been built around other people's needs. Not intentionally, just gradually. That's the part that surprised me. It wasn't the silence. It was how much lighter everything felt inside it. At first, I kept expecting something to pull me back. A call, a message, something urgent enough to justify stepping in again, but nothing came. Not right away. And that absence said more than anything else could have. Because when your role in a system disappears, what replaces it shows you what that system actually was. A few days later, my sister texted me. Not to apologize. Not really. Just different. "Hey," she wrote. "I didn't realize how much you were covering." I stared at that message longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to respond with everything I'd been holding back. Every moment, every receipt, every time I felt overlooked. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about catching up emotionally. It was about moving forward differently. I know, I replied. It's okay. And for the first time, that felt true. Not because everything was resolved, but because I wasn't carrying it the same way anymore. My father reached out a week later. Short message, direct. We'll start paying things back. I read it twice. Not because I doubted it, because I understood what it meant. Accountability doesn't always show up as an apology. Sometimes it shows up as action, even if it's late. And that's enough to change the direction, even if it doesn't erase the past. I didn't push it. Didn't track every dollar. Didn't follow up. Because once the boundary is set, you don't need to enforce it constantly. You just need to maintain it. That's the difference. Life settled into something simpler after that. My expenses were mine. My time was mine. My decisions didn't come with unspoken expectations attached to them. It wasn't perfect, but it was clear. And clarity has a way of replacing pressure. I still thought about them. Of course I did. Distance doesn't erase connection. It just redefines it. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to earn my place in it. I was choosing it. And that shift changes everything. Because once you stop proving your value through what you provide, you start understanding what it actually is. I was sitting on my couch one night. Nothing special. Just a normal evening, when that thought finally settled in. For years, I thought being needed meant being valued. I thought if I kept showing up, kept fixing things, kept saying yes, it would translate into something deeper. It doesn't. Need and respect aren't the same thing. One depends on what you can give. The other depends on how you're seen. And if someone only notices you when you're useful, they're not seeing you. They're seeing access. That was the part I had to accept. Not all at once, but clearly. Because once you see that difference, you stop confusing obligation with connection. You stop calling it love when it only shows up under pressure. And you realize something most people avoid admitting. Boundaries don't break relationships. They reveal them. If someone respects you, they adjust. If they don't, they push back. And that response tells you everything you need to know. Looking back, I don't regret what I gave. I just regret how long I thought it defined my place. Because the truth is, if your absence creates a problem, you were never the solution. You were the system. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't what people do to you. It's what you quietly allow. It doesn't happen all at once. It's small things. A yes here, a pass there. And before you realize it, what used to feel like generosity starts feeling expected. That's the shift most people miss. You think you're helping, but over time, you're teaching people what you'll tolerate. And I get it. Part of you doesn't want to make it a problem. You don't want to be the difficult one. So you keep it easy. You keep saying yes, but easy doesn't stay easy. Because care, without limits, turns into obligation. That's the part I had to learn. Not to stop caring, but to recognize when it stopped being mutual. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about showing people where you stand. And the moment you draw that line, everything becomes clearer. People either adjust or they push back. And that reaction tells you more than anything they've ever said. Because respect isn't measured when things are convenient. It shows up when something changes. When you say no. When you step back. When you stop providing what they're used to. And if that shift changes the relationship, then maybe it was never as balanced as you thought. That realization isn't comfortable, but it's honest. Because real respect isn't built on what you give. It's built on how you're treated when you don't.